Blood Omen 2 is actually the fourth installment in the Legacy of Kain series, which started in 1996 with Blood Omen Legacy of Kain for the PlayStation. That spun off into a game called Soul Reaver, which starred a different main character and was quite a different kind of game. And then there was last year's Soul Reaver 2. So Blood Omen 2 actually reverts back to the 1996 storyline, which is all about an arrogant nobleman turned vampire named Kain, who is just hungry for revenge at this point, and with his newfound power wants to rule the world. Blood Omen 2 takes place about a couple of hundred years after the original Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, but it takes place before the Soul Reaver games. You don't need any previous experience with any of the Legacy of Kain games to get into Blood Omen 2. All you really need to know is that this powerful vampire awakens from what he realizes was a staggering defeat centuries before, and suddenly vampires are almost wiped out across the world of Nosgoth, and he joins with a vampire resistance to fight off the human forces and other things that have nearly wiped the vampire race off of the planet. The game itself is not quite as confusing as the context. It's actually a 3D action-adventure game, similar in some ways to the Soul Reaver series. But unlike last year's Soul Reaver 2, Blood Omen 2 has more of an emphasis on action, on hand-to-hand combat, whereas Soul Reaver 2 had a lot of puzzles in it. Blood Omen 2 does have quite a few puzzles in it, but they're really not quite that interesting. It's a lot of throwing levers and cranking wheels and stuff like that to get doors to open. Blood Omen 2 is a very bloody game. It's very violent, as you might probably expect. The interesting thing is that Kain really manages to come across as an evil character. It's not giving him enough credit to just call Kain an evil vampire, because he's actually a really interesting character. He's brought to life by a guy named Simon Templeman, who delivers Kain's lines really well. He's actually been providing Kain's voice through all four of the Legacy of Kain games. So the fact that you're playing as this character and you'll hear him talk in a lot of different cutscenes over the course of the game, that's easily the best part about it. Otherwise, the action and the puzzle solving is really pretty straightforward. The action is pretty simple. You just hold down one of the trigger buttons to put up your dukes, as it were, and you could either fight with your claws, or if you happen to find weapons lying around, and there are a number of different melee weapons you could use, you could fight with those. You just take turns basically hacking at your enemies or blocking their attacks. They'll sometimes block your attacks, but soon enough you'll find really simple patterns that you can follow to kill these guys. After you knock them dead, you pretty much always have to suck their blood. Kain sucks blood telekinetically. I suppose vampire purists might have a problem with the fact that there's no neck biting anywhere in Blood Omen 2. The reason you have to suck blood is because not only does it restore your health, but it also gives you experience. When you gain enough experience, your maximum health increases. Kain's got some pretty cool moves. He can grab at his foes and hoist them up off of the ground by their necks, and then perform all kinds of really hideous deeds to them, like smacking them in the face with the pommel of a sword and then stabbing them through the gut and things like that. On the other hand, there's some really sketchy collision detection issues in the combat in the game. You'll see your weapons and attacks just magically pass right through your opponents all the time. You'll see them sometimes go into a crouching animation to avoid your attacks, but sometimes it doesn't make any sense because they'll crouch under a vertical slash that should cleave them right in half, and it just magically passes right through them. You'll fight the renegade vampires every now and then in big kind of multi-staged boss battles, which can be pretty interesting, although they're really puzzle-driven and you just have to figure out what you're supposed to do, at which point they become pretty easy. Whenever you beat one of these renegade vampires, you gain one of their special powers, For instance, early on you gain the ability to perform these really long jumps, which you could use to vault across rooftops and huge chasms, and you could also use it to deliver a huge leaping punch against a distant opponent. Blood Omen 2 is a great-looking Xbox game. It actually looks quite a bit better than the PS2 version. There's little comparison side by side, even though one is ported from the other. The games do basically recycle the same character models and textures and stuff like that, but the Xbox version runs at a very smooth frame rate and a sharper resolution, and the colors look richer, and everything about it generally looks better than on the PS2 version. On its own terms, the different enemy characters don't look all that interesting, but Kain himself looks great, and some of the bosses you fight look pretty good too. The environments are all kind of steampunk combination of magic and technology. It's not terribly inspired, but it does look pretty good in the game, and some of the later areas do look really interesting. Overall, Blood Omen 2 isn't quite as interesting as the Soul Reaver games. The story is a lot more straightforward, and so is the action. Kain doesn't have quite as cool of a set of moves as Raziel did in Soul Reaver. In that game, Raziel could literally shift between two planes of existence. So Blood Omen 2 is a lot more straightforward. It's a linear 3D action adventure game. It's very solid, and it has a much better than average story and a really interesting main character. So on its own terms, it's certainly worth playing, worth checking out. And for fans of the Legacy of Kain series, especially those who've played the original Blood Omen game from '96, they'll appreciate some of the references to that game and just the fact that it continues Kain's story. So if you're interested in a decidedly gory 3D action adventure game, and regardless of whether you've played previous Legacy of Kain games, you do well to check out Blood Omen 2.